Chris Jenner for having me here and everybody else for organizing the protest before we get started. Well, I guess I'll start here. Does anybody here know what a brand new car used to cost in the early 1900s? You know? Oh, almost exactly. I have it marked at 5. Yep, about $500. And you might want to let that sink in for a second. In the early 1900s, a brand new car cost $500. What do you think that the men and women that are still living from this era think nowadays when they look at car prices starting around $10,000? Yeah. Do you think these people are possibly thinking, what the hell happened to our economy? I'm only 25 years old, but I can remember my family members trying to teach me. You ever heard the saying, you have to know the value of $1? I'm sure everybody's probably heard that, and what they mean by saying that is, it's important to understand that things you want don't come for free, and you have to understand that you have to work for your money, and that's a valuable lesson to learn. But when I hear that statement, you have to know the value of $1, today I think, what value does $1 have anymore? And that's incredibly sad. That's my reaction. And again, I'm only in my mid-20s, so you can imagine what people in their 80s and 90s think. At this point in history, the United States, our currency is worth less than 1/20th of what it was worth just before the Federal Reserve was created. Less than 1/20th. You know exactly what our dollar is currently worth when compared to its average value from 1800 until now?
4 cents.
4 cents? Again, very close. I have it at 8. But who knows? Maybe I'm being generous. How did we get here? Well, it's been a long, manipulated, and bloody road. And this road leads us back farther than the inception of the United States. This goes back to the Knights Templar, who actually created the idea of an international banking system, as well as the idea of having checks. The Knights Templar are a secretive military order of men who were originally working under the guise of protecting Christian pilgrims and their valuables after the First Crusade. At that time, many Christian pilgrims traveled to what they used to call the holy places, now known as the Holy Land. And being a military order, the Templar would provide protection to these travelers during their trip, provide safe house to keep their items of worth. A traveler would leave their valuables at one Templar location, and they would log each item deposited. Then they would give the traveler a receipt detailing their possessions and money. The traveler could then stop at a different Templar location, withdrawing funds. Then the Knights Templar decided they would start to give loans. They even loaned money to royalty. Back then it was actually illegal to charge somebody interest on a loan. It was called usury. So to get around that, they charged fees for services they provided and charged rent to people with mortgages. Eventually, the combination of the Templars' ever-growing wealth and military power began to worry the rulers of Europe. King Henry IV was up to his eyes in debt to the Templar and figured out a plan to take them out. On Friday the 13th, 1307, Henry IV had the Knights arrested and tortured. Under the influence of torture, many of the Templar confessed to heresy. After that, Pope Clement V, excuse me, a little windy here in the Windy City. After that, Pope Clement V decreed that the Christian monarchs of Europe arrest the Templars. Many of the knights were then executed, and in 1312, Pope Clement disbanded the Knights Templar, but their practices had already begun the groundwork for accumulating wealth and power through banking. Do you want this? Yeah, by all means. Thank you. Thank you to Riley. Many people are under the impression that the world's first central bank was the Bank of England. The world's first central bank was actually the Central Bank of Sweden.
And that's where BP's money.
This bank was founded in 1664. Despite the name the Central Bank of Sweden, it is not a government entity. It is a private bank. Does that sound familiar? The Bank of England, although not the world's first central bank, has certainly been the most influential. It served as the model for most of the large central banks currently in operation, and the idea of a central bank in general is one of the biggest reasons why it's possible that such a small group of power-hungry individuals can control entire populations. Having a central bank is creating a monopoly on the creation and distribution of money. What happens whenever there's a monopoly on anything? What happens is you get the worst possible product at the highest possible prices because there's no competition. It doesn't matter what the item is or who's running the business. Anytime there's a monopoly, the people will get the worst product for the highest price. Well, for almost a century now, Americans have been paying the highest price to the corporation called the Federal Reserve for an increasingly worthless product called Federal Reserve notes. And we are tired of seeing our currency devalued while our tax dollars are paying for big bank bonuses and hotel getaways rather than being used to bring us out of debt. That's why we're all here today.
And all the money BP makes goes to Sweden that made here.
That's right. All the money BP makes does go to Sweden, essentially from right here. And thank you. Now, some of you know how our money's created, and some of you don't. So real quick, I'm going to give you a synopsis of how our financial system works. First, you have to keep in mind that the Federal Reserve is a private corporation that operates for profit. It's not a government institution that operates for the benefit of the people of this country. This will become more obvious as I continue. You must also keep in mind that most of the money that we think of as money isn't physically in circulation. It's just numbers on a computer screen. The government goes to the Federal Reserve and says it needs X amount of dollars to put into circulation. The government purchases our dollars, known as Federal Reserve notes, with government bonds. A bond is the promise to pay back that loan at interest. So the Fed prints whatever the government needs, and the government now owes the Federal Reserve everything it borrowed plus interest. The problem here is, if you have zero, then borrow $100 at 5% interest, how can you pay off your $100 loan plus interest without eliminating the money supply? You can't. You can't do it. It's impossible. That's what it means when people say that we have a debt-based monetary system. If we ever actually paid off the debt, we would have no currency in circulation. Am I the only one that sees the problem here? No. So, some of you have heard that the banks create money, quote, out of thin air. Well, there's a reason for that statement, and I'll tell you exactly why that is. With this, again, first you must understand that the banks can loan out more money than they actually have at a ratio of 9 to 1. This means that every time you make a deposit, the bank can then loan out 90% of the money you deposited. Now, I didn't say the bank can loan out 90% of the money you deposited. The bank can loan out 90% of the amount of money you deposited. The bank doesn't take the money from your account to loan out. Otherwise, when you went to make a withdrawal, the bank would tell you, sorry, we loaned out your money, you can't have it right now. So, how do they make new loans? Well, what happens is when you deposit $100, that stays in your account, but then the bank creates on a computer screen an additional $90. This $90 can be loaned out at interest. If someone then goes to another bank, the bank, borrows that $90, then goes to a different bank and deposits that $90, that bank then creates 90% of that $90 of deposit and can then loan out that money as well, and so on and so forth. This is why people say that money is created out of thin air. It is.
It doesn't grow on trees.
So, what are the solutions to having a central bank that operates for profit and perpetuates inflation? Some people argue for a gold or silver standard. They say we have to have money backed by precious metals or something of intrinsic value, but the truth is that if you do your research, every economy that operates on a gold standard has failed just as miserably as our system is failing right now. And the problem there with the gold or silver standard is that precious metals can be hoarded and therefore manipulating the entire monetary system. If you study the history of these societies that use gold or silver as a standard, you can't find one single society that didn't fall into slavery or serfdom within just a few decades. I know a lot of you out there have probably read a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. Now, before that book was The Creature from Jekyll Island, it had a different name and it had a different author. That book is called The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, and it was written by a man named Eustace Mullins. A lot of you don't know who Eustace Mullins is, but you do know who G. Edward Griffin is, and let me tell you why that is the case. Believe it or not, G. Edward Griffin actually plagiarized The Creature from Jekyll Island from Eustace Mullins. The only thing that G. Edward changed about The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, other than the title, was that he advocated for the gold standard, while Eustace Mullins explains why having a fiat currency is actually a good thing, as opposed to having a currency that can be manipulated by precious metals. The powers that be do not want us to wake up to the truth about the gold standard, because it's most likely what they plan to implement after they purposely crash the Fed, and believe me, they almost for sure will crash the Fed. And I